Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. With vaccinations increasing, COVID-19 cases and deaths decreasing, we're now moving into the summer of 2021 with the reopening of the economy and all of the uncertainty of our ever-changing indoor and outdoor, vaccinated and unvaccinated protocols, and the politics that will drive how we all come back together as a unified or fractured community. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
One of the things the pandemic did is kind of show us that we're interconnected in the air that we breathe, and it has an impact, right? And what it means to leave people homeless means it also is a risk to you, because if we're talking about folks not being able to shelter in place, maybe if you get sick, there's not an ICU bed for you. It just created this connectivity between us all that I don't think existed before in a very tangible way.
This is the Executive Director of the Coalition on Homelessness, Jennifer Friedenbach. In this episode, we continue with our theme in featuring voices of nonprofit community leaders who are working on solutions for our thousands of unhoused neighbors, how the pandemic has impacted their work, and what solutions they see coming out of the pandemic to support their work and the unhoused community members they work with. I'm joined remotely by the Executive Director of the Coalition on Homelessness, Jennifer Friedenbach, and Street Sheet Editor, Quiver Watts. Thanks for being here, Jennifer and Quiver.
Thank you so much for having us.
So I'm a subscriber/reader of Street Sheet, which I love a lot. And Jennifer, I've been following all of your wonderful work for many years, pushing the system as hard as you possibly can, which is great. I'm so glad we could carve out the time to host both of you on the show. So I'd love to begin with Jennifer, having you provide the audience just an overview of the Coalition on Homelessness, your various programs, and the research pieces.
So the Coalition on Homelessness does something called community organizing, which was kind of made famous by Barack Obama. A lot of folks didn't necessarily know what that was, but what it is pulling people together with a common interest in trying to alter relations of power and address systemic change. In our case, it's really focused on homelessness. And we're about a 30-year-old organization founded by some unhoused folks and frontline service providers who are really frustrated with the lack of participation of homeless people in the crafting of solutions to homelessness, and pretty frustrated with the response to homelessness, which was primarily like, this is an emergency thing, let's open up some shelters, and not really getting at the systemic causes of homelessness. And so that's what we try to do. And we do outreach regularly to unhoused people and get their input on what we should be fighting for and try to get them engaged in these struggles. About half our staff have experienced homelessness, and our board, et cetera. And we basically take that input, create goals that we're working towards, and build campaigns around them using a variety of different tools, whether it's organizing protests or organizing hearings or writing legislation or doing lawsuits or doing research and releasing reports. We also have a newspaper, Street Sheet, that is written primarily by unhoused folks and is the longest continuously published street newspaper in the U.S. with the largest distribution, and something we're really proud of. And it has artwork, poetry, articles, really trying to express to folks what, from the street perspective, from unhoused people's perspective, what is going on about homelessness.
Jennifer, staying with you for a second, some of your research projects now, I know one of the ones you worked pretty extensively on was the Compassionate Alternate Response Team research piece. Can you share just a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. So, for years, we've been focusing on two things. We've been focusing on trying to, of course, end homelessness and create permanent solutions to homelessness, but also try to protect the folks who are forced to live on the streets. And the response from San Francisco has been primarily a police response, kind of moving people around at best or criminalizing folks and ending up in jail. And we really have been working on trying to shift away from that. And this latest, in a long string of different changes that we've been able to achieve is to halt that police response and have an alternative team that is made up of folks with lived experience of homelessness that goes out. And when someone calls the city, let's say I'm in my house and someone's blocking my doorway and I'm nervous about, for whatever reason, maybe I'm a single woman or whatever, I'm about opening the door, I can call this team or I can call 311 or 911 and this team will be sent out and they will very compassionately try to address the issue that's being called about in a way that's effective. So let's say the person really would like to go to a sobering center. They'd be able to provide transport and bring the person to the sobering center. So really trying to address the issue in a real way, hopefully moving towards getting that person permanently off the streets as opposed to just moving them from corner to corner to corner, which is what the police engage in. So that's the basic idea. And it's modeled off of a program in Eugene, Oregon called Cahoots that's been very successful for several decades doing just that.
Thank you. Turning to you, Cooper, so you're the editor and now producer of your own podcast as well. Could you share with the audience a little bit of Street Sheet?
So we've actually been back in print for a while. We have been printing for most of the last 30 years with a brief few-month break at the onset of COVID. We reduced from sending out issues twice a month to once a month, and this is our first month back with 2 issues a month. So we have somewhere around 20,000 issues right now that are going out, which is mostly content created by people with lived experience of homelessness and frontline advocates who are working with homeless people to address the systemic causes of homelessness. And an important part of our paper is that we really trust the leadership of people with lived experience and think that too often stories about poverty and homelessness in San Francisco, where the issue is so often talked about, too many of the stories leave out the perspectives of those who are the true experts, which are homeless people themselves. And so we really attempt to elevate voices that are left out of the conversation because we think that's where the real solutions come from. And yeah, like Jenny said, we have the most continuously published street paper in the world, but we're not alone. There are hundreds of papers now in the US as well as around the world. So we're also part of an international network of street newspapers, INSP, and we're all working on similarly getting news out that focuses on poverty and homelessness and is distributed by homeless people themselves. I guess the important thing that I left out there is that folks in San Francisco who are experiencing poverty and homelessness come into our office and pick up the newspaper for free, and then they distribute them on street corners around the city and keep all the proceeds that they make from sales. So it's not only a platform for folks to share their stories, but also a way that they can earn a little bit of money and participate in a community organizing project.
That's usually how I get my paper, is by purchasing it from one of the distributors. So do you, by chance, just have, it's a wonderful model because the paper is providing folks with some revenue. Do you have an idea of what an average distributor could conceivably create in the way of cash to help them with food?
It really varies. Actually, one of the big changes in the last few years that I've been working here is that we started offering a cashless payment program. And so, especially now in this high-tech era where there's lots of folks in San Francisco who aren't carrying cash, they can actually pay vendors using Venmo. Whereas before, we didn't have a very good idea of how much people were making. We can kind of look at the numbers a little bit now of like what's coming in on Venmo and see some people are maybe making snack money off of it, $10, and we have others who make upwards of $2,000 a month off of paper sales. So for some people, it has meant the difference between being on the streets and being in a SRO room or even in permanent housing.
I was reading in I think it was the February issue about the gentleman, I think it was Bill, who was really pushing you guys to go with the Venmo account.
Yeah, Charles.
Yeah. Sad to see him pass.
Absolutely.
So turning to both of you, this is a question I've been asking everyone over the last 15 plus months of doing this, and that is really, how has the pandemic impacted the operation of both Street Sheet, but also the Coalition on Homelessness? Let's start with you, Jennifer.
Well, Quiver talked a little bit about how it impacted the street sheet. I mean, can probably talk more, but this has been a very wild ride for all of us at the coalition. I mean, we completely changed up our operations in a lot of different ways, responding to the emergency response out on the streets. We also had to really bring in a lot of medical experts and really try to get a handle on what we should be pushing for within our pandemic response. The first things that we were working on was testing. We did a whole bunch of kind of coordinating calls between DPH in San Francisco and public health in Los Angeles and getting ideas on how to best do that. Did a ton of outreach and work on getting people to the testing centers and getting them tested so that things could be traced in terms of where the outbreaks are. We did a whole bunch of work around the shelters. The city wanted to keep the shelters open at first. We were opposed to that. We thought it was really dangerous. We wanted them to really open up the shelter-in-place hotels and the tourist hotels that were closed. There was a massive outbreak in one of our shelters where there was 105 positives. There was another shelter that was going to open during the pandemic that Quiver can talk about that Street Sheet weighed in on. And we pushed really hard for these hotels and getting as many as possible. We really fought for getting legislation passed at City Hall, calling for about 8,000 hotel rooms. We didn't get there, but about 2,500 rooms were secured in San Francisco at tourist hotels. And then we worked really hard on trying to push the city to do acquisitions, and released a report on that, did a whole bunch of campaigning around that, to kind of this unique moment where this opportunity to buy hotels, to permanently acquire them, to turn them into studio apartments, to acquire other kinds of housing, to be able to have subsidies for people to use in the private market because there was openings in the rental market that we hadn't seen before. So just tremendous shifting and us having to be nimble and working really hard. That said, for folks out on the streets, those who were not lucky enough to get a SIP hotel, it's been very, very brutal. Not having access to water, to their regular routines. A lot of the food sources were cut off, not being able to use bathrooms in cafes, et cetera. So a lot of our work was also focused on just trying to get those basic necessities to people that they needed through different social networks and trying to mobilize our contacts in communities when people were bringing folks water. And I mean, San Franciscans really stepped up and really, really helped the unhoused community. Eventually, the city kind of provided some of this stuff, but what we kept hearing over and over from folks is that they felt like the city was leaving them there to die. So it's been very rough. We're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, but it's been very rough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has been a very challenging year in a lot of ways for Street Sheet, especially in the first few months of the pandemic when we went out of print. It felt like such a huge loss, not just for folks that read the paper, but especially for our vendors who were suddenly without an income. And we made the decision primarily because we were under a shelter-in-place ordinance. And even as vendors were going out and trying to sell, people weren't even stopping. So there was a very sudden loss of income for the hundreds of folks that rely on Street Sheet sales. Fortunately, going back to printing once a month has been helpful in rebuilding our community and rebuilding that base of income for folks, but it's nothing like it was before the pandemic, even still. Our distribution numbers have fallen dramatically. Our vendor base has dropped off somewhat. And so it's definitely been a challenge. And then the flip side is that I think a lot of the work that we've done in the last year and a half has really been more impactful and meaningful than I could have anticipated. And we were lucky enough to be approached by a frontline service worker at the Moscone Center mass shelter that had been planned to open, who shared with us some very damning photos of the floor plan where people would have been sleeping on mats even less than 6 feet apart with no spacing and sharing bathroom facilities. And so within 24 hours of us releasing those photos and that story, the city had announced a shift away from that plan and started opening hotel rooms. So that was a huge win this year. We also, I think, have done a pretty good job of covering and translating the vast number of challenges for homeless folks and like rapidly shifting policies from the city into clear timelines that Jenny has helped work on that sort of track this moment in time in a way that is clear and digestible for folks, as well as just being a platform for information about COVID and testing and vaccinations and that sort of thing, especially in the Tenderloin, but around the city. So it's been a hard year, but it's also been a really important year for Street Sheet.
Thank you. Great insights. So Jennifer, turning back to you. So now here we are in what I consider to be our kind of pseudo-normalcy, if you will, where we're all magically coming back. And it lasted for less than a month, right? Where all the numbers have jumped 70% in 2 weeks. How is the coalition coming back in this reopening?
Yeah. So for us, a lot of the work can be done remote except for outreach. And outreach, if it's outdoors, of course, a lot safer. I mean, there's this kind of natural thing that happens outdoors. It's actually protected a lot of unhoused people. It's not the case as much with Delta because it's so transmissible. So I think like any other workplace, we're trying to get to 100% vaccination. And if folks are vaccinated, it makes things a lot easier in terms of coming back into the workspaces. A lot of our staff are making kind of different decisions around that, but there's things that are lost in community organizing. A lot of it is about relationships and building relationships with folks out there. So those interpersonal connections are really important and those are coming back and we're slowly trying to build back to the place that we were before. A lot of the focus in terms of specific COVID related work is focused on trying to get folks vaccinated. And there's, of course, community members that are resistant to getting vaccinated and providing them with information on that. But then there's also people who logistically it's difficult for them. And so we're trying to work out those logistics and make sure that they can get vaccinated. So we have like a project where we're paying people who are peers to go and talk to their other peers and help them get vaccinated. And that's been pretty successful.
Staying with you, Jennifer, you've been there for a while, working uphill, pushing the proverbial rock up the hill each day. What do you feel has been the biggest impact that the coalition has had on changing people's perception, if you will, having an impact on helping our unhoused community members, changing city policy, et cetera?
I think our biggest, and we haven't yet seen all the fruits from this, but is most definitely Prop C. And it's an initiative we put on the ballot that we authored, gathered signatures for, and then pushed through. We had over 300 unhoused folks that were calling over 90,000 voters and knocking on over 30,000 doors, and had a huge volunteer effort as well among housed people. And basically what it does is it taxes on average about 0.5% corporate income over 50 million. So it doesn't kick in until the 50th million. And it brings in about $300 million a year. We were held up in court for a couple of years. We also fought in the court case. We won the court case. So this has been kind of a prolonged struggle. And then there's an oversight body that we're a part of and did an investment plan. All of this is about to be finally approved by the Board of Supervisors and then signed by the mayor. But it's going to be about 4,000 exits out of homelessness for folks. It's going to be almost 1,000 new treatment beds, over 1,000 new shelter beds, huge prevention efforts, which is really key, really keeping people in their homes so they don't lose their housing and don't have to experience homelessness to start with. And so that's a big part of it as well. And luckily, the funding, we really carefully crafted it. They only can spend it on those 4 things. So they can't spend it on other stuff. But the city still tries. And so there's a lot of struggle there. And even within that, there's a lot of choices to be made. And we've been really working hard to center unhoused people's experience in this process. First, we did a big report where we did a 200 question survey of about 600 unhoused people. And then we did these listening sessions with about 800 unhoused people. All of that kind of formulating the basis for the recommendations on the investment plan on how to spend the money. So for the most part, everything that's being rolled out is in alignment with what unhoused people would like to see, which for us is incredibly important because we want to make sure that the money is used very wisely and is not wasted on stuff that is not going to make a tangible difference in the lives of unhoused people.
Thank you. Congrats on Prop C and staying with it all the way through. I've been tracking it. It's an amazing effort. Inquever, turning to you, what do you feel has been the biggest impact of Street Sheet on our unhoused community? But also, I think most importantly, it provides a wonderful educational tool.
I have not been with Street Sheet or the coalition nearly as long as Jenny, so I don't have the same long-term perspective. But I would say in the years that I've been at the coalition, definitely Prop C. I mean, having Street Sheet as a tool to get the word out about Prop C, I think was really useful and helped mobilize a lot of folks. And I think the campaign also brought some of our vendors more into organizing work, which is always a goal and a challenge as folks are struggling to meet their day-to-day needs. But it's really fantastic when our vendors are able to plug in with some of the more systemic change work that the coalition is doing. And I think something that I'm excited about now is that we have started being able to offer stipends to writers who have lived experience of homelessness. And so we're not only just offering a platform, but we're also helping writers with lived experience build up their skills and learn more about journalism and become regular contributors to this paper. So we're able to build the community a little bit more and also provide more like direct training to folks that are interested in submitting their stories, submitting articles and artwork and that sort of thing. And I think that's a really fantastic aspect right now.
So it's as much an employment opportunity as skills training to have your voice heard. And Jennifer, turning back to you, how can folks who are listening to the program today support the Coalition on Homelessness work and Street Sheet?
So we have a website, COHSF. It's the initials for Coalition on Homelessness, San Francisco.org. And folks can donate on that site. There's also information on our working groups. We have a staff directory that kind of outlines the different areas of our work. And people can email staff and say, hey, I'm really interested in getting involved in your human rights work. How can I help? And it's really very much a collective effort. I mean, a lot of what we've been able to achieve, we would have been able to achieve without community support. I mean, it just wouldn't have been possible. And so whether that's donors, whether that's people who are volunteering and doing all these different things. I mean, if we look at CART, which was how we kind of started the conversation, we had about 50 different folks that were involved in that. And then part of it was researching literally every similar program on the planet that did alternatives to policing, looking at their models, combing through, doing phone calls and interviews with folks that run it, and then kind of pulling out all the best practices and advice, and then people doing research on dispatch and combing through thousands of pieces of paper, looking at the dispatch protocol and how things would need to change as calls are coming into the city. So that's an example, but that's how we do it. Whereas staff people, we're kind of the center of the wheel and sort of making sure and orchestrating and facilitating everyone's involvement, but it really is a big community effort.
Thank you. And Quiver, could they become subscribers? I've been reading the electronic version of it, of course, on your website. Besides purchasing it from one of the distributors, which we hope there'll be more, how can folks support?
The best way to support is definitely buy a paper every time you see a vendor, and not just stop and buy the paper, but say, hey, what's up? Find out a little bit about what their day's been like, have a conversation, because so much of what we're trying to do is change the perceptions of how San Franciscans, who often have a lot of false ideas and stigmas against homeless people. So starting that conversation, treating homeless folks with respect and engaging when you're buying your paper is like such a small gesture, but I think a really transformative one. I would say also there's lots of ways to plug in. So if you are a person who has lived experience of poverty and homelessness and have ever considered writing either journalism or just your own story, or you're a poet or you're an artist, please feel free to reach out, submit content to us. We love publishing stuff from our community. And something that I failed to touch on earlier when you were asking about the highlights of Street Sheet during my time here, something that I've really been trying to do in our recent issues is to call attention to intersections between poverty and homelessness and other issues, because I think so often homelessness is thought of as an isolated political issue and not as something that impacts the lives of many, many people across a lot of different identities. And so most recently, we had a disability justice issue that was written and created entirely by people who are disabled or mentally ill. We've done a couple of sex worker issues that are all content created by sex workers. And right now we're working towards an immigration issue that'll be coming out in October to sort of explore the ways that homelessness impacts a variety of different communities. So plugging in with that, reach out to me if you want to create art or stories, contribute in that way. And then, check us out online, streetsheet.org. You can read our online edition, and you can also listen to our podcast.
And staying with you on the podcast, so now you're producing a podcast. Can folks get that in their usual spots as far as Apple Podcast, et cetera?
Yeah, we're everywhere that you get podcasts, I think, except for Amazon, because we take issue with Bezos.
I can't imagine why you would. So staying on the idea of podcast, someone who might be listening to the show because they're listening to a podcast and they wanted to help you, because I know you're one person trying to do it all, and I know how much time and effort goes into creating a podcast. So if someone wanted to volunteer to be an editor or help you do recording or engineering, how could they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Email me. I'm qwatts@cohsf.org, and that's for Quiver Watts, qwatts@cohsf.org. Always looking for volunteers. And if you have a skill that we haven't listed on our website that we're looking for, still reach out. We're always down to help plug you in. And if you have experience doing interviews, if you have experience doing audio editing, if you contribute a song, we try to play music on every episode. So there's lots of different ways that you can plug in.
Great. And then turning back to you, Jennifer, could you please share one of your favorite stories of working with the Coalition over this time?
So many to choose from. Well, one of our Street Sheet vendors had a pet chicken that he liked to bring into the office. And that was a lot of fun. We have a lot of pets and animals around, and the chicken was around for a while. Wasn't the cleanest pet. I guess it's kind of hard to potty train chickens. I don't know why, but yeah. And, the chicken had a little bit of a drinking problem, but ended up getting adopted by somebody else who was worried about her alcohol problem. And so she went on to have a great life from being a homeless chicken to a house chicken.
Very nice.
That is a true story. I can attest to that. There was poop on the floor for 6 months.
Yes, I can't quite see a chicken with a diaper on, but yes.
No.
So final question for both of you. I'm going to start with you, Quiver. So what would you say are some of the positive things that have come out of this pandemic to support the work of Street Sheet and really increasing the awareness of our unhoused neighbors and all the issues?
Yeah, definitely the silver linings are hard to see sometimes, but there has been a lot of transformation during the last year and a half. More folks have been signing up to do mutual aid. I think actually engaging with homeless people. We've had a lot of folks who've stopped to film and report back when they see encampment sweeps happening. There have been a lot more people reaching out wanting to volunteer with the organization. We now have a copy editing team. It's like 5 people that help with the copy editing of the paper every month. Just a lot more energy, I think, because people have some time as they're working from home, and also because it may have been easier in the past to somehow look away from the injustices of capitalism and the way that homeless people have been treated in San Francisco. But it's really difficult to grapple with or look away from the violence being done to people left on the streets during a global pandemic, where the main message from the city is shelter in place, stay at home, and thousands of people have no place to go. So I think for a lot of people, this is illuminated an issue that has been our focus for a long time. And I hope that that continues after the pandemic is over, that it actually was never just for people to be on the street. The pandemic may have made that more obvious, but we need housing for every single person, and there's never an excuse not to have that. So yeah, I think we have a lot more folks who are keyed up and ready to fight, and that's what we need. We need more of us.
Yeah, and just to add to what Quiver was saying, which I totally agree with, I think part of that shift was also people who could feel separate from unhoused people. And one of the things the pandemic did is kind of show us that we're interconnected in the air that we breathe, and it has an impact, right? And what it means to leave people homeless means it also is a risk to you, because if we're talking about folks not being able to shelter in place, maybe if you get sick, there's not an ICU bed for you. It just created this connectivity between us all that I don't think existed before in a very tangible way. And then the other thing I would say is that the SIP Hotel experience, 2,000 people were moved off of the streets into hotels in a very short period of time. And that had not been done anywhere close to that, maybe after the earthquake or something in history that I'm not aware of, but at least during the modern era of mass homelessness that we're experiencing now. And the transformative impacts for folks that were able to have the dignity of a door to lock, a bed to sleep in, it was huge. And we would have never even thought about hotels or student housing or any of these sites as possible housing. And so it opened up this whole opportunity, and it opened up real estate options that I mentioned earlier. And so I think that's the second piece of the silver lining, is housing opportunities that didn't exist previously.
That housing is really healthcare.
Housing is absolutely healthcare. My God, yeah, that's really one of the things that you can see it in people's faces. Our human faces are like maps of our pain, right? So you see in people's faces how unhealthy they are, how healthy they are, but you also see people's faces change so dramatically when they're on the streets versus when they have a place to rest and to sleep. And it really impacts people's health, whether you're able to take your medication that you need because you have a chronic health condition, whether you're able to get the rest that you need because you're chronically sleep deprived when you're out on the streets, whether you're able to stay out of the elements. All of these things contribute so greatly, which is why unhoused people, medically present 25 years senior their calendar year. So as a 50-year-old woman, as homeless would present as a 75-year-old woman. So really, homelessness is killing people, just to double down on your point that housing is healthcare.
Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing the Coalition on Homelessness's work today, and Quiver for sharing about the publication of Street Sheet. We'll make sure that listeners have your contact information, website, and social media so that they can follow the Coalition on Homelessness. And of course, purchase and subscribe to Street Sheet, as well as listen to Street Speak podcast, and to get engaged in your work and to help our unhoused neighbors. Please stay safe and healthy as we work our way through this strange new pseudo-normalcy.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, really thoughtful questions. Thanks for all of that. It was helpful just to even talk it through and remember everything that's happened.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voices of the Executive Director of the Coalition on Homelessness, Jennifer Friedenbach, and Street Sheet Editor, Quiver Watts. To donate and find out more about the Coalition on Homelessness and to sign up to become a member, go to cohsf.org. And to read, donate, and participate in the publishing of Street Sheet and production of the podcast Street Speak, go to streetsheet.org. To find out more about other nonprofits supporting our fellow unhoused community members, please listen back to these informative and insightful interviews from our past shows. Donice and Chris from Lava May X share about providing showers and water in Episode 3. Sammy with Community Forward SF in Episode 5 tells us about housing and medical services. And Megan with Simply the Basics in Episode 16 talks about their hygiene bank in a pandemic. Doug from Huckleberry Youth Programs in Episode 19, as well as Demarie and Charles from At the Crossroads in Episode 29, tells us about their work helping our unhoused youth. In Episode 36, Mark and Martha with Hayes Valley Bakeworks share with us how they are providing culinary training to formerly unhoused community members to provide food to unhoused folks via Project Homeless Connect that you can hear more about in Episode 9. George and Kenneth tell us how Glide Foundation is supporting Tenderloin community members in Episode 42, and Kelly shares all of the work Tipping Point Community is doing to build more affordable housing in Episode 47. We really want to hear from you in our short listener survey, so please go to georgecoster.com and click on the survey button on the upper right-hand side of the homepage and provide us your feedback and insights. Please tune in to KSFP 102.5 FM on August 5th at 8:30 a.m. for next week's show, where we hear from the voices of Rebuilding Together San Francisco on helping our seniors through a pandemic, and the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative's work on establishing affordable, community-controlled co-op housing and mixed-use projects. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, and Casey Nance at Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.